Nobody worries about the good child. That's the problem. They worry about the loud one. The rebellious one. The one who throws tantrums, breaks rules, pushes back. Those children get attention. Those children get intervention. Those children get seen. But the good child? The one who never complains. Who sits quietly while adults talk over them. Who says yes before anyone even finishes asking. Who smiles through discomfort because somewhere along the way they learned very early that their feelings were an inconvenience to the people they needed most. That child gets called a blessing. And nobody stops to ask what it cost them to become one. Here's the truth that most people aren't ready to hear. Obedience in a child is not always a sign of a healthy upbringing. Sometimes it's a sign of a child who stopped feeling safe enough to be themselves. A child who learned, through silence, through disapproval, through the subtle withdrawal of warmth, that love in their world came with conditions attached. Be good. Be quiet. Don't make this harder than it already is. And so they adapted. They shrunk. They folded the loudest, most inconvenient parts of themselves into something small enough to be accepted. And everyone called it maturity. Think about that child for a moment. Maybe you remember one. Maybe you were one. The kid who always did what they were told. Who never caused a scene. Who carried the emotional weight of an entire household on their small shoulders and never once said it was heavy. And here's what nobody tells you about that kind of childhood. The child isn't learning how to be good. They're learning how to disappear just enough to stay safe. They're learning that their anger is dangerous. That their sadness is a burden. That their needs, their very real, very human needs, are somehow too much for the people who are supposed to hold them unconditionally. So they stop showing those needs. And eventually, they stop feeling like those needs deserve to exist at all. Where do you think that child goes? They don't disappear. They grow up. They become the adult who can't say no without guilt eating them alive. The person who over-explains every boundary they try to set. The one who apologizes for existing in spaces that inconvenience others. The partner who gives endlessly and then one day quietly breaks, not with a scream, but with a silence that nobody noticed building. That's who the obedient child becomes. And the painful part isn't just what they carry. It's that most of them don't even realize they're carrying it. Because to them, this is just who they are. This is just how life works. But it isn't. And that's exactly what we need to talk about. There's a moment, and if you were that child, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, where you made a decision so quietly, so unconsciously, that you didn't even realize it was a decision at all. You decided that who you actually were wasn't worth the risk. And so you built a version of yourself that was agreeable, helpful, low maintenance. Someone who made other people's lives easier simply by making themselves smaller. Psychologists call this the false self. A constructed identity built not from genuine expression, but from survival. From reading the room and shaping yourself to fit what the room demanded. And the terrifying thing about the false self is how convincing it becomes, not just to others, but to you. Because after years of performing it, you start to forget there was ever anything underneath. Here's what that actually looks like in daily life. It looks like someone who is genuinely wonderful to be around. Warm, dependable, always available. The person everyone leans on. The one who shows up. The one who remembers. The one who holds everything together without ever being asked. But behind that is behind the smile and the availability and the endless giving, there is a person who goes home and feels completely hollow. Not sad exactly. Just empty. Like they spent the entire day pouring from a cup that nobody ever thought to refill. And the cruelest part? They don't feel entitled to complain about it. Because they chose this, didn't they? Nobody forced them to help. Nobody forced them to say yes. So the exhaustion stays silent. The resentment stays buried. And tomorrow they wake up and do it all over again. Ask yourself this, and really sit with it. How many times have you said yes, when every single part of you was screaming no? How many times have you swallowed something that deserved to be said? How many relationships have you bent yourself inside out to maintain, not because they fed you, but because the thought of someone being disappointed in you felt unbearable? That unbearable feeling has a name. Psychologists call it approval addiction. And it doesn't come from weakness. It comes from a childhood where approval felt like the only stable currency. Where being liked meant being safe. Where disappointing someone carried a risk that felt, at the time, genuinely life-threatening. The nervous system doesn't forget that. Even decades later, even in relationships that are completely safe, the body still braces. Still scans for disapproval. Still rushes to fix tension before it fully forms. Because somewhere deep in the wiring, the obedient child is still there. Still watching. Still managing. Still terrified of taking up too much space. And this is where it gets really important. Because this pattern doesn't just affect how these people feel inside. It shapes every relationship they enter. Every friendship. Every partnership. Every professional dynamic. They attract people who take. They stay too long in situations that diminish them. They mistake familiarity for love and exhaustion for loyalty. And nobody around them sees it. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. The obedient child learned to make sure of that too. But here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. This isn't a life sentence. This pattern, as deep as it runs, as long as it's been there, is not who you are. It's what you learned. And what was learned can, slowly, carefully, be unlearned. The question is, where do you even begin? You begin with the hardest thing. Not therapy. Not journaling. Not any technique or strategy or self-help framework. You begin with honesty. The quiet, uncomfortable, sitting alone with yourself kind of honesty that the obedient child spent an entire lifetime learning to avoid. Because here's what that child was never taught. Feelings that don't get expressed don't evaporate. They don't quietly dissolve because you were disciplined enough to suppress them. They go underground. They settle into the body, into tension headaches, into chronic anxiety, into that low hum of emptiness that follows you even on the good days. They show up in the way you flinch at conflict. In the way your chest tightens when someone seems even slightly disappointed in you. In the way you can be surrounded by people who love you and still feel completely, inexplicably alone. That's not a character flaw. That's an unhealed wound expressing itself the only way it knows how. And healing, real healing, starts the moment you stop calling that wound a personality trait. Here's something that might be difficult to sit with. Many people who grew up as obedient children develop what psychologists describe as a deeply fractured relationship with their own identity. Not because they lack intelligence or self-awareness, but because their sense of self was never truly allowed to form independently. It was always shaped around someone else's comfort. Someone else's expectations. Someone else's version of who they needed you to be. So when someone finally asks, "What do you want? What do you actually feel? Who are you when nobody needs anything from you?" The silence that follows isn't emptiness. It's the sound of someone realizing they've never genuinely been asked that before. And that silence deserves to be honored. Not rushed. Not fixed. Just held. Because beneath it, beneath all the years of compliance and people-pleasing and quietly swallowing your own truth, there is still a self. Intact. Waiting. Surprisingly resilient considering everything it's been through. Now let's talk about what reclaiming that self actually looks like. Because it doesn't look like what most people expect. It doesn't look like suddenly becoming loud or confrontational. It doesn't look like burning relationships to the ground or announcing to the world that you're done being accommodating. That's not freedom. That's just obedience wearing a different costume. Real reclamation is quieter than that. And harder. It looks like pausing before you automatically say yes, and asking yourself what you actually want to say. It looks like letting a moment of conflict exist without immediately rushing to smooth it over. It looks like sitting with someone's disappointment without treating it as an emergency that requires your full emotional resources to fix. It looks like saying, "I need time to think about that," and not apologizing for it. These are small moments, invisible to most people watching. But inside they feel revolutionary. Because every time you choose your own truth over someone else's comfort, you are sending a message to that obedient child inside you. A message they never received when they needed it most. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have needs. You are not responsible for managing everyone else's emotions at the cost of your own. And here is the thing nobody talks about in these conversations. Healing this particular wound doesn't just change you. It changes who you allow into your life. Because as you slowly stop performing, stop shrinking, stop over-explaining, stop preemptively apologizing for existing, something remarkable happens. The people who were only there for the performance begin to drift away. And the people who are capable of loving the real version of you, the unpolished, boundary-setting, occasionally inconvenient version, those people start to feel possible for the first time. That shift is terrifying at first. It can feel like loss. Like you're dismantling something that at least kept you safe, even if it was slowly hollowing you out. But on the other side of that fear is something the obedient child never got to experience. A relationship, with yourself and with others, that doesn't require you to disappear into it. A life that doesn't feel like a performance you're exhausted from keeping up. A version of love that doesn't come with a list of conditions you have to quietly fulfill just to earn your place in it. That is what's waiting. Not perfection. Not some idealized version of who you could have been if things had been different. Just you, finally, fully, unapologetically, you. And if you've watched this entire video and felt something shifting inside you, something you can't quite name but can definitely feel, then you already know this wasn't just content you consumed today. It was something you needed to hear. Drop a comment below and tell me, did you grow up as the obedient child? Do you still see those patterns in yourself today? Because I promise you, you are not alone in this. And sometimes just knowing that, just seeing your own experience reflected back at you, is the beginning of everything. If this resonated, share it with someone who needs it. Not because the channel needs the views, but because somewhere out there is someone still carrying this silently. Still performing. Still shrinking. And maybe this is exactly what finds them today. The next video goes somewhere even deeper. And if this one moved you, that one will stay with you.